Welcome to Begging the Question, the show where you ask the questions and we give you the answers. I'm Dan Vaughn. This is a Protagonist Soccer show. I'm joined by some co-hosts. Let's get into them. John Howard Fusco. What's shaking, Bacon?
Evening, Dan. How are we doing? Doing well.
I am doing fantastic. I mean, really, really fantastic. Hey, you know, I was watching, I watched a movie today, and I watched Oppenheimer, and I was wondering, this is sort of tangentially related, what's your favorite microwave food?
My favorite microwave food? Wow, that's an interesting question. You know what really comes out good in microwave, believe it or not, is eggs. If you want to do like a scrambled egg, actually I like comes out pretty well. If you're going in the sandwich. For a sandwich, yes. For a specific application,
Look at it.
Works very well.
Hedging his bets. Dan Creel, welcome to the show.
Hi, everybody.
How are you today?
I'm good. You could ask me a question.
I was going to ask you a very different question.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to throw you off. I was going to ask you, what was your favorite government-funded project of the Roosevelt administration?
Oh boy. So I don't know the name of it. Here's the thing. You asked me a question that actually, so I was an anthropology major in college, and we did summer anthropology kind of school, and did it in Mississippi. I went to Mississippi State University, Bulldogs. We excavated a mound group that had been upgraded, can we say, by the Works Project Administration. So they took this kind of round mound and they made it look more pyramid-like to make people hopefully come and stop on the side of the road to look at it. So yes, WPA, I think I would pick.
I was gonna say the Hoover Dam, but favorite microwave food?
Burritos.
That's pretty solid. Pretty solid. John, did you have a favorite Roosevelt administration project?
Tennessee Valley Authority.
Right. Which is that's a good one too.
Is it the correct answer? Social Security? I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Was that a Roosevelt administration program? I thought it was.
Yes, it certainly was.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
But you had one, John. I don't want to cut you off here.
I was trying to think of a stadium built around that time, but nothing's coming to mind. So
all right, well,
trying to keep it tangential to the actual.
Enough of my questions. I've got a question for you from a listener/watcher. Let's see it.
Oh boy!
Hey Pod fans, Josh Duder here from Protagonist Soccer, recording at George Fox University. My question for Begging the Question is: the de facto first college soccer game ever played was between Rutgers and Princeton in 1869. The first NCAA soccer championship took place in 1959. Currently, there are roughly 1,750 varsity men's programs alone between NCAA Division I, II, and III, plus NAIA and JUCO. Additionally, there are about 45,000 female college student athletes who play soccer. The college experience is an essential component of the American sporting lifestyle. But is it a hindrance to developing world-class players? Because college is not accessible to all and can be a massive financial burden, is it time for our leagues to end the draft system as a reward for their elitism and find more inclusive ways to identify and recruit talent? Would U.S. soccer benefit by having a more fair and accessible development system?
Okay, can we just for a second, and I didn't stop it with most flattering. Can you see his notes in his sunglasses?
Yes, yeah, and holding his phone.
I was like, there seems to be no way he could remember all that.
No. And
so Josh Duder.
Do you want me to? Should I remove this picture now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Doesn't he look like he should be like a helicopter pilot? Like,
do not forget that the cuddly Josh Duder that we know now was once a hardened Marine.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely true.
Yeah. I would not have thought that I would be friends with a Marine, but here we are. Okay, Josh Duder.
Wow.
Josh Duder taps into a question that I've tapped into on a previous episode of the show, which is questions about that player development pipeline, how it currently runs through universities and colleges across this country. He asks, should we change that to make it more inclusive for those maybe kids that aren't prepared to go to college or can't afford to go to college, etc.? And then he asks, and if you guys remember better than me, it seems like he asked, how would that improve the U.S. national team? I think I could be wrong on that, but let's kind of dig into the question. So again, I'm returning to my old stomping grounds here because I have problems with the collegiate / university programs that currently gobble up all the talent across the country. And, even when you watch, Josh asked about abolishing the draft system. Thank you. Sorry, but for MLS and NWSL. I'm not a big fan of the current system as it stands. I don't like it. I feel like it kind of convolutes education and athletics in a way that I don't think is good. If you're a big fan of college football or college baseball or college basketball, maybe you think it's good, but I'm not a big fan of that. I would also say that it sort of passes over a lot of the talent development over to universities who may or may not be good at it across the country. I will say that it's paid dividends for the women's side of the game in that I would say a lot of the talent development that has happened in this country, and that's sort of paid off for us, at least in the last 2 World Cups. Who knows about this current one? But it's certainly paid off with us by generating tremendously talented athletes who have come through basically major college programs. You think of like the Naomi Gurmas of the world who came through Stanford. Lots of famous athletes have come through North Carolina and their program there. So it clearly has paid off for some aspects of the game. I'm just not a big fan of it. I just think it's not the right people to be handling all that. John Art Fusco, you're next to me, so you're my equal. Let's ignore Dan. He is subservient to us. He's the JUCO to our tier 1 programs.
Indeed.
Correct.
Yeah. So again, we're attacking college athletics here. Let's. So yeah, I mean. And again, when we talk about soccer, we're comparing it to the rest of the world, which does nothing like the level of interest in college athletics that we have here, which has existed for, let's face it, for more than a century. I mean, when college football became a big thing in the 20s, that kind of was, the cat was out of the bag at that point. It was never going to go back to college athletics being something smaller. It became business. And soccer, while it's not at the same level that college football, college basketball, or even college baseball are at, it still has a very strong following. It still affects certain leagues in terms of when they can have players available. And the thing is that by the time, and this has been talked about many times, by the time these athletes are coming out of college, that they're 21, 22 years old, a lot of people say that they're already a little bit past to where they can be as far as development. You can't now take a 22-year-old and now develop them. Now some do, some are late bloomers. That does happen. But in the academy type system that exists in other parts of the world, players are starting a lot younger than that, and they're taking on like an apprenticeship, and they're starting younger, and they come through a club system, and a lot of these stars are now showing up in top teams 17, 18, 19 years old. These are players who would be just starting their college years, are now playing full-time professional. So it's a very different attitude towards it. And maybe it works better for football, for gridiron football, that by the time they're in the early 20s, they're maybe a little more physically developed. And they can take the strain of a contact sport like football. Even in basketball, we're seeing now players less and less are likely to stay 4 years in a college. They may go for a year and then go to the pro game. So that already is kind of going away. With soccer, it's by the time they're coming out 21, 22, I mean, they could still become a professional. They could probably still be a solid MLS player, but you're not going to get your star players that way. That's not where they're coming from. They're either going to get them when they're younger, or you're going to bring them over from Europe. So the question is, if that's the case, then what do you do? College athletics has such a stronghold on people's enjoyment in this country. So it's hard to kind of reverse that. You're starting to see more and more academies being formed in the U.S. And eventually, if that continues to happen, and more clubs from Europe come over and form academies, and if MLS continues to push for developing talent, it'll be interesting to see how it affects the college game as a whole, because maybe more talent will be siphoned away from going to college and will be going into academies where they'll start their training sooner. Yeah, I mean, I do think in a way it does kind of get in the way. It was. I remember when MLS first started and it would have the draft, and I thought they were looking at the same way as the NFL draft, the NBA draft. But the reality was that the talent coming out of the draft just wasn't at the same kind of level, relatively speaking. You still had to bring in your best players from outside the country, at least in the beginning, to kind of get the league going. So, I mean, there's some exceptions to that. I mean, you look at someone like Brian McBride, was certainly an exception to that, who was drafted, but was immediately a star player and eventually made his way to Europe. So there were exceptions, but as a whole, it was not really, the draft is really not where MLS builds their talent, so to speak.
Yeah, it's I think it's U.S. soccer. It's kind of a mishmash. It's a constant mishmash of things. So the problems of college get compounded by the problems of U.S. soccer, and it builds on itself. I think the closest of the major sports in the U.S. to kind of the development system with college and players who are not going through college is kind of the baseball system, right? You do have players who come right out of high school and go into minor league baseball. I know it's changing a little bit now because they've restructured everything. It's kind of the same. And then you have players who decide to go to college and go through the college system. And then after college, they will get pulled into they have minor league draft, right? But it's a bit more mature system, even though that's multi-layered, where with soccer, it's kind of, you've got all these multiple layers. And so college is part of it. It just makes it just kind of a more confusing mess. And so the problems compound themselves. And like John was saying, it's not like players kind of get into this pipeline, whether they go to the lower leagues in soccer or MLS and kind of go through. MLS has its own separate pipelines, and you see a lot. Basically, it feels like MLS players who go to college and kind of get drafted through the super draft and kind of stick are those high level programs like UCLA's, the Stanfords, the really top level programs, which are basically, they're making a ton of money. And so these kids can go to these schools and get really good exposure. They really good competition, and they basically get what they need from a development standpoint to come out of like UCLA. I'm just using that for example, and ready to go into MLS, and MLS picks them and slots them right in, where most colleges aren't to that level. And MLS, you'll get drafted. You see the super draft now, and you get down to what, third or fourth round, and you see a lot of teams just like, we don't want it. Right? It's passing, which is, I think, telling. And so you get a lot of players who go to college, go to 4 years, really talented. You see a lot in the USL League One and the third division, right? NISA, very good players who just kind of didn't get captured, and they go through really good schools, Virginia Tech, let's say. And MLS just doesn't care about them. And there's so we talk about minor league baseball. That happens with players that the MLB doesn't really care about them, but a player can play in the minor leagues and do really well, and Major League Baseball would say, aha, right, I'm going to take that player and give him a chance at the majors, where there is a really strong divide with MLS, right? And so that they really, if they're not drafted on the super draft and you're a college player, I don't know, it's super difficult to make your way into MLS, because it's not just U.S. players. It's not just North American players.
Right.
They need a player. They can go overseas. They can go Central and South America. And so I think, and then they have NCAA eligibility, right, which just messes everything up when it comes to soccer, because for most of the rest of the world, like John was saying, and this is a huge problem, in NCAA sports itself, it's unpaid labor, right? With soccer, most other countries, you're either, like you said, apprenticeships, or you're like, grinding out in these lower levels, and you can get paid, right? You can make a part-time job or kind of pay the bills. Where in the U.S., the system isn't set up that way. And so you're having this competition with kids here in the U.S. who can go somewhere else and make money if they have like connections. And so I think for me, I think for me, Dan, it's kind of like, oh, there's issues with college, right? Like you're saying, but then it's built into this whole U.S. soccer system that is just a hodgepodge, and it makes it that much worse. And I don't know what you do about it. I think it's slowly starting to, it does feel like MLS is disconnecting more and more from the college game. And then what happens with that, right? The pipeline is getting kind of disconnected. And what does that mean, right? I do think just the feeling for soccer, it feels to me like there needs to be more opportunities for players of that age, coming out of high school, late teens, early 20s, to make money off of playing soccer, right? Which other countries have. That there's a pressure that we don't have in the US. And it really is, from both the development standpoint and just honestly keeping talented athletes interested in playing soccer, that we do a disservice to our soccer players in the US. And kind of the traditional college pipeline is part of that we're just so used to it. And it's just going to continue, but it needs to change if we want to kind of grow the game here.
I think that one of the things that happens in the United States in soccer, and I would actually say in all sports, is that it feels like, and it's probably, if I had to guess, it's probably because of ownership groups that cross over between these. But there's like, baseball has an all-star game. Well, that means NFL has to have a Pro Bowl, and hockey has to have an all-star game, and NBA has to have an all-star game, and MLS does these weird all-star games where they don't even play each other. They bring in a club team from somewhere else to play. And the draft, to me, is like that, in that no other soccer structure across the world, as far as I know, uses a draft, and yet MLS does. And it basically feels like the NFL, a bunch of owners who came over and started MLS, wanted to continue that.
Yep. And
it is a way to control players and their futures through slapping a label on them.
Yep.
It's the same thing with homegrown rights and all of that weirdness that transparently I don't even understand all that well. If I'm real, I know that it exists. I know homegrown players are a particular thing, and I think it gives you some kind of discount when you're signing them, I think. Again, so there's all this weird artifice that's built into MLS that was built in at the beginning by a bunch of football owners who carried it over from NFL. And the explanation, or the reason why a lot of this stuff hung around for a long time, is that it was in theory good for the league. It stabilized things. It kept the price of labor low. It helped stamp down competition. And at this point, like, if MLS wants to be taken seriously, and when I say that, I want to be careful. I don't mean that I don't think that the MLS Super Draft, by the way, I don't think the MLS Super Draft is not just a draft; it's a super draft. But I don't think that's top 10 on things that people complain about MLS. But I truly believe that it holds back the clubs who like to develop talent, who would like to. There are certain teams, if you look at like a Dallas, who really specialize in taking players and develop them up and then shipping them off to make money, which is a model that actually applies all over the world. It just feels like the draft kind of holds back, like it's this weird, again, artifice, this thing that got installed and that doesn't really, it's our vestigial tail or something of MLS that's just kind of lingering.
Yeah, I mean, it's that constant, when you always talk about professional soccer in the United States, it's this constant battle between how Americans do sports and how the rest of the world does sports. And we do have this constant battle about it because MLS wants to still be a very American type league. Their franchises, their markets. It's a closed league. We have a draft. All these kind of very, very standard issue Americanist kind of things that we're used to all the other sports. These are the things we do. American sports, we have a draft. These are franchises. They go to markets. Sometimes we move them. We move them to different markets. This is what we do. Where Europe or rest of the world, they don't do any of these kind of things. It's very different. So when you watch soccer now and you become wise to how the way the rest of the world works, you feel like it's this weird conflict of like, yeah, I know this is what Americans do, but the rest of the world doesn't do this. And it always sometimes it comes across as like, why do we have to do it this way just because it's an American league? But it's like, well, because that's what we always do, kind of thing. The other thing was with MLS is that their initiatives in the last number of years has been about really driving player development and bringing in talent from outside the U.S., young, late teens, 18, 19, 20, develop them here for a year or two. And then, as you talked about, sell them off to as a feeder league, sell them off to make profit on them. They have the U22 initiative they started recently. You've seen, especially like I know Lanny and I for a period of time, for a couple of years, was like bringing these really talented players from South America, but like, 19, 20 years old. If they're college players in the U.S., they'd still be in college, but this is the age where you try to grab them before they, and then ship them off to Europe. I mean, look at a player like a player who was playing for Red Bull New York, who played for like a year and a half. Who then eventually, I guess he played in Leeds last year, and his name now totally escapes me, but he plays on the
Tyler
U.S.
Adams?
team. Yes. Okay. Tyler Adams played in MLS for maybe a year and a half, and he was 19 when he got sold off to Europe. So I mean, that's the model. It's like as soon as they show talent and ability, we're looking to make a profit on it.
Well, John, it's really interesting. I think back, and maybe it's not 10 years, maybe it's 15 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, when Jordan Morris decided I think he played at Stanford, if I remember correctly. And he wanted to play college ball at Stanford instead of trying to find a route into Europe. And he was criticized pretty soundly for it. And then when eventually he ended up at MLS, to this day, people still kind of hold it against him. Of course, he tried to go to Swansea for 5 minutes and then blew his leg out, which, again, I'm not wishing that on anybody, obviously. But it is interesting that, like, a lot of people see the decision to go into college as a detriment, that if you had the skill, you would find a way to get into Europe, or you'd find a way to get into one of these development programs.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm sorry. I think that's what makes soccer different than the other major American sports, is that people know that the best leagues are in Europe, and that if you are a top player, that's where you want to go. I mean, we look at it, the NFL. NFL is the best league for football, and Major League Baseball is the best league for baseball. NBA is the best league for basketball. That if you want to be the best, you go to those leagues. They know that MLS is not the same, and that if you want to be the best, you have to go to Europe. So it actually does hang with someone if they say, I'm going to stay in college and I'm going to go to MLS. People are going to look at that as like, well, you're not trying to be the best, that you're settling for something other than that. So yeah, I mean, for Jordan Morris is a really good example of that, because it is, to this day, I think it's still looked at as a criticism. Yeah.
I was just going to point out, I was going to connect, follow up on that of, there's one issue with the Jordan Morrises who have a choice, right? And how MLS and college and all that kind of determines the choices they have and what choices he should have made and not. I think for me, it's important to look at those players who don't have a choice and they're kind of pushed into a system, and probably the vast majority of players that we're thinking about go to play club in high school. They end up going to college, and at that point, they're kind of in. If you don't have a choice to go elsewhere, you're in the U.S. What choice do you have? You basically are in college, and then the biggest, probably the biggest national soccer league in the U.S. is USL League One, right? And it is a summer amateur league for mostly college players. They don't get paid. They play in the summer. They get to play.
About League Two?
League Two. Sorry, what did I say?
You said League One. You got League One on the brain.
Yeah, I do. USL League Two. I apologize. USL League Two, which is a great league, super solid. But it is this business model is built on the college model. It literally is. It is a kids are in college. They're play during the fall. Come spring and summer, they'll come into USL League One or NPSL, right? UPSL, but I'm concentrating on USL League Two. And then they go back in the fall, right? They go back to school in the fall.
And to build off that, what if you're a young lady? Because there are really not a lot, and USL is talking about starting a paid league for women. There's not a lot of paid opportunities to play soccer. If at 18, if you're not good enough to play in the NWSL, like you got to go to college if you want to keep playing soccer. Like you don't really have a choice,
right?
Because you got to make a living. At least when you go to college, if you can land a scholarship, if you're good enough to land a scholarship, at least then your room and board are paid for. You're in theory getting an education if that's what you focus on. So I just think there's so many, even like we're talking about the hurdles for young men, 100% they're there, but it's even worse for women because there is so much less paid opportunities, even the size of the professional leagues.
Right.
Yeah.
Compare the two. It's a third the size of MLS, the NWSL is, and there are no championship. There is no League One.
Right.
It's a big gap there.
Yeah. We've been talking about, and we constantly hear this about growing the game. Like we're growing the game, things are getting bigger. We're trying to invest in the game, but what has grown the most, and what we've seen literally since the maybe the first few years of the MLS period, like early 90s, going way back for some people. But the promise was, we're going to grow the game. It's going to be a big, pro leagues. It's going to grow. What happened is the pro game grew for a few years, and then it imploded because of the cost of it. And what happened is it is what we continue to see now. The game grows from the top up, and then from a professional standpoint, I'm literally from players getting paid to play at whatever level. It is pretty much crazy top heavy. And then everything else that would be like in baseball and minor league kind of semi-pro level, it's all college and it's all summer amateur leagues. And that is because of in large part, and maybe a main part, is that how the U.S. is athletic pipeline is built through the college model. And you have this NCAA eligibility, which really restricts players. Mm-hmm. And so even if a player has an opportunity to get paid during the summer, or most of them cannot do it because they'll lose their eligibility. I think it's kind of changing.
I'm not sure,
but I don't think it really is changing.
No.
But we're still living in that world because we've had, generations of this. And so for me, the you could point to MLS, but for me, the big kind of hurdle is this. We constantly talk about this in the US, is that big middle ground, is that big kind of lower level semi-pro to pro, from top amateur to semi-pro to pro, that level, which basically it is formally non-existent, right? Because we have pro and amateurs, just whatever the system, but practically it's also kind of just not not there. And so you have, like we just talked about, you have players who go to college and then they play, and the vast majority of them have that's it. They're done, right? They come out of college and that's it. They're done. They have nowhere to go. Like you said, Dan, I appreciate what you said. Men have little opportunity. Women have way less opportunity to kind of make money off the profession of soccer that they want.
Yeah, which is why when you see what's happening in Europe with women's soccer and the investment that's being made there, at least now for some women, they do have the opportunity now. They can go overseas and work on build a career there. So, and it's unfortunate that's happening there, and it's not happening as much here. I hope that changes with the talk of these professional leagues that are hopefully coming out in the next few years. Hopefully that will change. But yeah, I mean, the amount of investment that's happening in Europe in women's soccer is it's amazing to see. And so at least there is some opportunity there. But yeah, I mean, it just the amount of amateur leagues and amateur clubs, especially in the summer. I mean, where they're only playing 10, 12 games. They're basically 3-month-a-year clubs, but so much talent goes into that, year in, year out. Is that a good thing? I don't know. I don't know if that's a good thing or not.
Yeah, I was just quickly going to say that a real big practical part of this is that it's cheaper not to pay your players, right? And if you can have that level and get folks in the stands by not paying your players, it's just practical. Versus paying them and losing a bunch of money potentially. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you, if you're kind of have enough money and want to run a soccer team, run a USL League 2 team, NPSL team? You see this in Annapolis Blues, 8,000 people in the stands, and that is an amateur club. Good for them, but that's a lot. That's 8,000 people in the stands. That's making money. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I'm going to wrap up, but John is exactly right. The women's game in the U.S. has an opportunity. Europe is starting to pull away from them because they're saying, "Well, come over here, we'll pay you. You get someplace to stay. You're going to play soccer. You're going to get coached up by the best coaches, and we're going to pay you to do it." And if we don't do it here, the gap that we have, you see it already happening. You see it already. Everybody's catching up with the U.S.
How dare you? They're
about to overtake us if we don't do something from a.
He's tossing dirt on that grave of the defending 2-time champions of the Women's World Cup, sir. Back to back. And you're tossing dirt on that grave. I don't believe it till I see it. USA. This isn't going to age well if you're watching this after they've been knocked out of the group stage by Portugal. I definitely, one of these days, maybe we need to ask our own questions about unpaid labor and the ethicality of amateur soccer, particularly if there's success in drawing crowds. Little Rock, back-to-back matches, over 2 matches, drew 14,000 fans across two matches. That's a pretty established USL League 2 team. The Annapolis team, I know that we have teams that are drawing 2,000-3,000. Shouldn't there be some profit sharing or something, or just some sort of?
What about the women's team, the Aurora, that have been very good, top, well drawing 5,000-6,000 people a match. Mm-hmm. It's like they're ownership groups that are figuring it out, but they're doing it with, as Dan's put out, unpaid labor.
I mean, think about asking a business, right? Okay, you're bringing in 8,000, 10,000 people per game. You're not paying your player. You're not paying your workers. What's stopping you now from? You see how popular your product is. I'm honest question. What is stopping you now next year from paying your players? And I'm just interested to hear what the answers to that are. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Josh Duder, hope we answered your question. Excellent work as always, gentlemen. To you, our viewer / listener, thank you for listening to us discuss this question. I know that we didn't have all the answers just yet, but we hope that we piqued your interest and made you think a little bit about it. Absolutely. There's some fermentation or something happening inside my brain. Maybe that's why I stink so much. But if you enjoy this show, there's a whole host of other shows on the Protagonist podcast feed. We have all sorts of shows about all different levels of lower league soccer. We're on some of them. I would recommend them. If you haven't checked them out, please do. There's other things on this YouTube channel. We hope that you like and subscribe. Maybe hit that notification button so that whenever our new show comes out, you know that it's here, because we'd love to have you come back and check us out. But we hope you enjoy the show. Have a wonderful one. We'll see you soon again on this show, Begging the Question.